The stage lights softened into a warm glow as the young Filipino boy stepped out from behind the curtain, his heart pounding louder than the audience chatter echoing across the theater. He inhaled sharply, trying to steady his breath. This was the moment he had dreamed about for years but never imagined would come with such weight. The America's Got Talent stage stretched before him like a universe of its own. Massive, intimidating, and beautiful all at once. His shoes clicked softly against the glossy floor as he walked toward the center, toward that iconic white X. Every step felt heavier than the last. He kept his eyes down for a moment, trying not to get overwhelmed by the ocean of faces staring at him, but eventually he lifted his gaze, and the audience seemed to hold their breath as one. Some people leaned forward, some whispered, some smiled, but all of them were watching. He smoothed his shirt, a simple outfit with subtle touches inspired by Elvis. The small collar, the polished shoes, the hairstyle he had practiced a dozen times in front of his mirror. It wasn't meant to be a costume, it was a tribute, a quiet love letter to the music that raised him. When he finally reached the mark, he looked up at the judges' panel. Simon Cowell stared at him with that familiar mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The boy felt his stomach twist. This was the man whose approval could change his life. Sofia Vergara offered a warm smile, clearly sensing his nerves. Heidi Klum gave him an encouraging nod. Howie leaned forward, hands clasped, already interested. "How are you?" Simon asked, his tone neutral but attentive. The boy swallowed, his throat tight. I'm good," he managed. "I'm here to sing Elvis." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his anxiety. A shift moved through the room. Elvis, on AGT, that was a daring choice, maybe even a dangerous one. The audience exchanged glances. Some raised eyebrows, some whispered. The judges reacted too. Simon arched a brow, Sophia widened her eyes, and Howie tilted his head like he wasn't sure what to expect. Elvis wasn't just a singer, he was a legend. And legends were hard to touch without inviting criticism. But the boy held onto the microphone with both hands, trying to keep them from shaking. He knew this was the only path he wanted. His grandfather used to play Elvis vinyls every morning back home in the Philippines. Those memories were etched into his soul. Sun Records, Graceland, the King's voice echoing through their small living room. It wasn't imitation, it was connection. And tonight, he wanted the world to feel that connection too. Simon studied him silently, reading the determination behind the trembling voice. "All right," he finally said. "Whenever you're ready." The boy took a deep breath, closing his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Enough to hear his grandfather's voice in his mind telling him, "If you're going to sing Elvis, sing from the heart." His chest rose. His shoulders steadied. When he opened his eyes again, something inside them had shifted, not confidence exactly, but courage. The last bit of chatter faded. The air grew still. The stage seemed to shrink until it was just him, the microphone, and a room full of strangers waiting to see whether he would fly or fall. The cue light blinked. The music prepared to start. And in that quiet moment before the first note, he whispered to himself, "Do it for him, do it for you." Then the spotlight tightened around him like a warm embrace, and he stood on the X, ready to face the world. The music starts with a soft, familiar guitar riff, the kind that instantly transports everyone back in time. But the theater is still filled with doubt. The audience has seen countless Elvis impersonators, and most of them never live up to the pressure. Even the judges exchange cautious glances, unsure of what to expect from this quiet Filipino teenager standing under the spotlight. He closes his eyes for just a moment, takes a breath deep enough to steady his hands, and lifts the microphone with slow confidence. Then he sings the very first note. It isn't just good, it isn't just accurate, it's alive. A rich, warm, unexpectedly deep tone washes over the room, and the entire atmosphere changes in an instant. People in the back rows look up sharply. A few audience members gasp out loud. It's not an impersonation, it feels like a rebirth of a voice they thought they'd never hear again. Simon's eyebrows rise immediately, his expression transforming from polite patience to outright disbelief. Sophia covers her mouth with both hands as if she's afraid of interrupting the moment. Howie, usually joking, is suddenly serious, staring at the boy like he's witnessing something rare. Even Heidi leans forward so far that her elbows lift off the desk. The boy opens his eyes and something in him shifts. The nervousness melts away as he realizes the crowd isn't judging him, they're mesmerized. His voice grows steadier, fuller, more confident with every line. He shapes each lyric with emotion, not copying Elvis but channeling a feeling that seems beyond his years. There's a hush in the theater, a strange, beautiful silence where no one moves, no one coughs, no one even whispers. All attention is locked on him. The Filipino teen who walked in quietly but now commands the entire AGT stage like a seasoned performer. As he glides into the chorus, his tone becomes brighter, more vibrant. The texture of his voice carries both innocence and power, an unusual combination that hits the audience right in the heart. Some listeners close their eyes, soaking in the nostalgia. Others stare with widened eyes, realizing they're witnessing something truly unexpected. Even the camera operators react. One zooms in on Simon's face, capturing the exact moment he stops blinking, frozen in disbelief. Another sweeps across the audience, revealing people whispering, "Oh my God," while clutching their chest or fanning their face. The boy steps slightly forward, letting the music lift him. His shoulders relax. A small smile forms, not cocky but grateful. He feels the connection, the acceptance, the acknowledgement that he belongs on that stage. His voice becomes smoother, more polished, rising with passion that seems to fill the entire theater. The judges aren't the only ones stunned. Viewers at home, watching through millions of screens, will later replay this moment over and over. That first note, so pure, so unexpected, becomes the moment everyone talks about, the moment that shifts the entire audition from ordinary to legendary. As he reaches the final line of this section, his voice softens, glides, then lands perfectly on pitch. The crowd erupts, not in noise, but in pure emotional energy. You can feel it in the air. Something extraordinary has just begun. The boy looks out into the bright lights, taking in the shock, the awe, the sudden respect. Nobody expected this. Not the judges, not the audience, not even the boy himself. But one thing is now certain. This Filipino Elvis didn't just start singing, he changed the entire room with a single note. The moment the music flowed into the second verse, something unexpected happened, something nobody in the room was prepared for. The young Filipino singer, who entered the stage trembling and cautious, suddenly seemed to awaken into a completely different version of himself. It wasn't dramatic or forced, it was subtle, smooth, and almost magical. It was as if the spirit of a true performer slowly rose inside him, guiding every movement with a confidence he didn't show before. At first he simply shifted his weight, taking one careful step to the side. Then another. His voice grew warmer, stronger, more connected to the emotion behind the lyrics. The nervousness that had once wrapped around him melted away beneath the bright lights. The audience sensed the shift immediately. Whispers stopped, eyes widened, and the room leaned in as one. The kid wasn't just singing anymore, he was becoming the performance. He lifted his free hand and let it gently glide through the melody, as if shaping the air around him. The gesture was simple but filled with rhythm, drawing people deeper into the moment. He wasn't copying Elvis, and he wasn't trying to be a caricature. He was interpreting the legend in his own way. Smooth, respectful, modern, and deeply emotional. A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd when he stepped forward and tilted his head slightly, his voice hitting a rich, soulful tone that felt almost too big for someone so young. People exchanged looks, some smiling, some shaking their heads because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A teenager from the Philippines was controlling the entire room with nothing but his voice and a natural stage presence that felt unreal. The camera cut to the judges. Sophia had her hand on her chest, swaying with the rhythm. Heidi was smiling from ear to ear, nodding as if cheering him silently. Howie leaned closer to the desk, looking impressed, genuinely impressed, like he had just discovered something special. Then the shot moved to Simon. His reaction was slower, quieter. He didn't clap or smile right away. Instead, he leaned forward with both elbows on the table, studying the kid like he was trying to understand how such a transformation was happening in real time. His eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked almost proud. Even though the performance hadn't ended yet, that's when the boy made his first bold move. He slid one foot back, just slightly, letting the rhythm guide him. Then he stepped forward with a gentle sway of the shoulders. Classic Elvis energy, but clean and natural, not exaggerated. The audience responded instantly, cheering louder, recognizing the familiar aura wrapped in a fresh, youthful presence. With every second, the performance grew richer. The lights followed him as he moved across the stage, reflecting off his face and highlighting the confidence now blooming inside him. His voice climbed, expanding into the upper notes with surprising strength. The emotional depth in his tone told everyone there that he wasn't just singing the lyrics. He was feeling them. A woman in the front row wiped away a tear. A man behind her recorded the moment with shaky hands. The audience wasn't just watching, they were connecting with him, rooting for him, falling into the story he was telling through the song. By now, the judges weren't just impressed, they were captivated. Even Simon's expression had changed from curious to stunned. He whispered something to Heidi, shaking his head in disbelief, and she nodded, laughing softly as if saying, "I know, this is unbelievable." And then, almost like a final spark to ignite the room completely, the boy took a deep breath, lifted the mic with both hands, and let out a note so clean and powerful that people in the back rows rose from their seats. The transformation was complete. He wasn't nervous anymore, he wasn't trying to impress, he was simply owning the stage and everyone knew it. The music swelled softly beneath him, building into that familiar Elvis rhythm that carried so much weight. The young Filipino singer could feel the entire AGT theater breathing with him. He could hear every heartbeat, every whisper, every tiny shift in the seats. It was as if the whole world had paused just to watch what he would do next. His palms were sweating, but his voice felt stronger than it ever had before. He took one step forward, adjusting his grip on the microphone. The lights above him warmed his face, turning his nervous energy into something powerful, something electric. He knew the final part of the song was coming. He knew the note that terrified him during every practice session was seconds away. The note he could never hit perfectly when he was alone. The note he told himself he might skip tonight, but somehow he also knew that if he wanted this moment, really wanted it, he had to go for it. In the front row, Simon Cowell leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching with a focus that could break anyone's confidence. But instead of fear, the singer felt something else, something that lifted him, something that pushed him. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was the memory of practicing in his small bedroom back home in the Philippines, pretending he was on a stage like this. Maybe it was the thought of his family watching, hoping, praying. Whatever it was, it steadied him. He closed his eyes for half a second and let the music guide him. The crowd was silent, waiting. The band softened, giving him room. And then, with a deep breath, he launched into the final chorus. The first words came out smooth, controlled, filled with emotion that flowed straight from his chest. The theater grew even quieter. People leaned in. A woman in the balcony reached for her heart. A teenager in the audience whispered, "Oh my God." And then it came. The moment everything had been building toward. The note. He lifted his chin slightly, feeling his whole body tighten in preparation. The sound rose from the very core of him, starting low, then climbing higher and higher, with a strength he didn't even know he had. It wasn't just loud, it was pure, clean, full of emotion. It carried through the air like something alive. Simon's reaction was instant. He sat up straight, sharp, like something had just jolted through him. His eyes widened slightly, not dramatically, but enough for the cameras to catch. This was the moment that made Simon go from watching to witnessing. He glanced quickly at the other judges, as if silently asking, "Are you hearing this too?" Heidi's hand flew to her mouth. Sophia whispered, "Mao," under her breath. Howie's eyebrows shot upward in surprise. The audience, frozen for a moment, suddenly erupted with gasps and cheers that only grew louder as the note continued, unwavering, nearly unreal. But the boy wasn't done. He held the note longer than he ever had before, pouring every ounce of emotion, every dream, every struggle, every prayer into it. His face tightened with passion, but his voice never cracked. Not even a little. And just when everyone thought he would let the note fade, he pushed it even higher. Another climb, another burst of power, another wave of disbelief through the audience. People stood without even realizing they were standing. A woman wiped tears from her eyes. Someone shouted, "Wes," from the back row. Even the cameras seemed to struggle to capture the energy exploding through the room. Finally, the music dropped, giving his voice one last spotlight. And with perfect control, he let the note fall gently back into the final word of the lyric. Soft, smooth, beautiful. The second it ended, the room broke. Thunderous applause, screams, cheers that echoed up to the rafters. It was no longer an audition. It was a moment people would talk about for years. And as he opened his eyes, breathing hard, he saw Simon still staring at him, no longer judging, but in awe. The final note hung in the air like a miracle, vibrating through the walls, echoing into the rafters, and sinking into every single heart inside the AGT theater. For a moment the world seemed to freeze. No clapping, no cheering, no breathing. Even the judges stared, stunned, as if their minds were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. And then it happened. A single clap, then another. Then the entire audience exploded into applause so loud, it felt like the room was shaking. People shot up from their seats so fast you could hear chairs snapping back. Phones flew into the air to record the moment. The stage lights, sensing the intensity, burst into brighter beams, illuminating the young Filipino singer standing there in disbelief, his hands trembling, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, eyes glistening under the golden glow. He looked around as though trying to understand whether this was real. Just minutes ago, he had walked onto the stage nervous, unsure, almost invisible. But now he stood in front of thousands who were cheering so loudly that his name was swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Sophia stood up first, clapping above her head. Heidi followed, smiling ear to ear. Howie nodded proudly, but it was Simon Cowell who made the moment unforgettable. Simon rose slowly, almost reluctantly, but with a smile so genuine it softened the entire room. He crossed his arms as he stood shaking his head in disbelief, staring at the boy as if he had just uncovered a treasure buried deep in plain sight. The audience saw him, and they screamed even louder because Simon almost never stands unless something is truly extraordinary. The boy covered his mouth, overwhelmed. Tears spilled down his face as he bowed deeply, his voice cracking as he tried to thank the crowd, but he couldn't. His emotions were too powerful. His dream, the one he'd carried since singing Elvis songs in a small room back home, had collided with reality in the most spectacular way. Simon finally leaned into his microphone. "You know," he said, pausing as the crowd quieted enough for his voice to cut through. "I've heard many Elvis covers. Many. But what you just did, that wasn't a cover. That was a moment." The audience screamed again. "You didn't just sing Elvis," Simon continued, pointing at the boy. "You brought him back, and I mean that." The boy's knees nearly buckled as he pressed a hand over his heart, overwhelmed by the words he had dreamed of hearing his entire life. Sophia added, "You're a star, a real star. That voice, that presence, it's unforgettable." Heidi leaned in, her eyes sparkling. "You gave us goosebumps. Every single one of us." Howie finished it off with a proud smile. "America just fell in love with you." The boy wiped his tears, still trying to speak, but the crowd wouldn't let him. They continued cheering, louder, louder, and louder, until the entire theater felt like it was vibrating. It wasn't just an ovation, it was a declaration, a celebration, a moment that would live on in clips, reactions, and millions of views worldwide. And in the center of it all stood a young Filipino singer who came to honor Elvis, but ended up shaking the entire AGT stage, capturing hearts across the world and creating a memory so powerful that even Simon Cowell couldn't sit still for it. Tonight, a star was born, and the world knew it.